السادة الحضور، الخبراء المشاركين، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أود أن أرحب بكم في هذه الجلسة، والتي تعتبر أحد منصات نشر المعرفة التي يستثمرها المركز الإقليمي للتخطيط التربوي في نشر الدراسات والبحوث التي قام بتنفيذها مع نخبة مميزة من الخبراء. إن هذه ال90 دقيقة من المعرفة التربوية سوف تناقش استكشاف تأثير التعليم قبل المدرسي ومشاركة أولياء الأمور على التأثير في مرحلة الطفولة المبكرة في دول مجلس التعاون الخليجي. الأخوة والأخوات المشاركين والحضور، كما تعلمون بأنه لقد تم الاعتراف دائما ومنذ فترة طويلة بالتعليم قبل المدرسي باعتباره نقطة نقطة انطلاق حاسمة في رحلة الطفل التعليمية. إنها فترة تكوينية تبدأ خلالها العقول الناشئة في استيعاب المعرفة وتطوير المهارات الأساسية وبناء الأساس للنجاح الأكاديمي في المستقبل. في هذه الجلسة سوف نتعرف بشكل مدعوم ببيانات ونتائج الدراسات على الأثر العميق للتعليم ما قبل المدرسي على حياة الطلاب وتحصيلهم الأكاديمي واكتسابهم المهارات الأساسية. تظهر الأبحاث باستمرار أن التعليم ما قبل المدرسي يعزز بشكل كبير التطور المعرفي لدى الأطفال الصغار. وقد وجدت دراسة أجراها المعهد الوطني لأبحاث التعليم المبكر أن الأطفال الذين حضروا برامج ما قبل المدرسة عالية الجودة أظهروا مهارات لغوية أفضل وكفاءة أكبر في الرياضيات وقدرات معرفية أفضل بشكل عام مقارنة بأقرانهم الذين لم يلتحقوا بمرحلة ما قبل المدرسة. هذه المزايا في التطور المعرفي يمكن أن تمهد الطريق لهم مدى الحياة في النجاح الأكاديمي والإنجاز على مستوى الحياة. كما أن التعليم المدرسي يلعب دورا حاسما في تضييق فجوة التحصيل الدراسي بين الأطفال من خلفيات اجتماعية واقتصادية مختلفة. وقد أثبتت العديد من الدراسات أن الأطفال الذين يلتحقون بمرحلة ما قبل المدرسة هم أكثر عرضة لدخول المدرسة بالمهارات الأساسية، ويظهرون سلوكا أفضل في الفصل الدراسي، ويحققون أداء أفضل كذلك عند مستوى الصف الدراسي أو أعلى منه في سنوات الدراسة المبكرة. تؤكد هذه النتائج على الدور المحوري لمرحلة ما قبل المدرسة في تعزيز التحصيل الأكاديمي للطلبة. لا يقتصر أثر التعليم في مرحلة ما قبل المدرسة على تعزيز التحصيل فقط، فهو بالإضافة لذلك يساند ويدعم تطوير المهارات الاجتماعية والعاطفية، حيث أن برامج ما قبل المدرسة عالية الجودة تساعد الأطفال على بناء المهارات الاجتماعية الأساسية مثل المشاركة والتعاون وحل الخلافات، كما أنها تعزز التنظيم العاطفي وضبط النفس، وهما أمران أساسيان للنجاح في المدرسة والحياة. وتظهر الدراسات التتبعية للطلبة على المدى الطويل أن الطلبة الذين التحقوا بمرحلة ما قبل المدرسة لديهم فرص أكبر في استكمال التعليم الثانوي ومواصلة التعليم العالي وتأمين عمل مستقر والمساهمة بشكل إيجابي في مجتمعاتهم. أن الاستثمار في التعليم قبل المدرسي لا يعود بالنفع على الأفراد فحسب، بل على المجتمع ككل. ويقدر تقرير صادر عن لجنة التنمية الاقتصادية أن كل دولار ينفق على برامج عالية الجودة لمرحلة ما قبل المدرسة هناك عائد يصل إلى 7 دولارات في هيئة وفورات في التكاليف وفوائد اقتصادية طويلة الأجل. ويشمل ذلك خفض الإنفاق على التعليم وانخفاض معدلات الجريمة وزيادة مهارات القوى العاملة وإنتاجيتها. لا شك أن التعليم في مرحلة ما قبل المدرسة هو حافز قوي للإنجاز الأكاديمي وتنمية المهارات. وتوضح البيانات ونتائج الدراسات المختلفة كذلك أن برامج ما قبل المدرسة تزود الأطفال بالأسس المعرفية والاجتماعية والعاطفية التي يحتاجون إليها للنجاح. وحتى يكتمل التأثير الإيجابي للتعليم ما قبل المدرسي فلا بد من توافر دعم الوالدين للطفل في هذه المرحلة من خلال تنمية حب التعلم لدى الطفل بواسطة القراءة لهم والمشاركة في المحادثات المحفزة وتوفير التعرض لتجارب جديدة. أظهرت الدراسات أن الأطفال الذين يتعرضون لبيئة تعليمية غنية في المنزل تكون لديهم مهاراتهم اللغوية والقرائية والكتابية أكثر تطوراً، وهم أكثر عرضة لدخول مرحلة ما قبل المدرسة بفضول طبيعي ورغبة في استكشاف العالم من حولهم. فالدور الذي يقوم به أولياء الأمور في التنمية الاجتماعية والعاطفية لأبنائهم وتطوير المهارات الاجتماعية الأساسية مثل المشاركة والتعاطف والتعاون وتقديم الدعم العاطفي وتعليم الأطفال كيفية التعبير عن مشاعرهم والتعامل مع التحديات وتقبلها، والنظر إلى الفشل على أنه فرص للنمو وتطوير المرونة والمثابرة والإيمان بقدرتهم والتحسين بمرور الوقت. إن الآباء هم المربي الأول والأكثر تأثيراً في حياة أطفالهم، وخاصة خلال مرحلة ما قبل المدرسة الحرجة. لا يمكن المبالغة في تقدير دورهم في تعزيز حب التعلم ودعم التنمية الاجتماعية والعاطفية، ومن خلال المشاركة الفعالة في رحلة أطفالهم التعليمية وخلق بيئة منزلية راعية ومحفزة. يمكن للوالدين وضع الأساس لتجربة تعليمية ناجحة ومرضية، ووضع أطفالهم على الطريق نحو التعلم والإنجاز مدى الحياة. أن دعم الإمكانيات ودعم الإمكانيات التحويلية للتعليم قبل المدرسي، مما يستدعي على صناع القرار بناء السياسات والبرامج التعليمية التي تعمل على توفير تعليم ما قبل مدرسي عالي الجودة، وبناء شراكات فعالة مع أولياء الأمور، وتحديد الأولويات، والاستثمار في برامج التعليم في مرحلة الطفولة المبكرة لضمان حصول جميع الأطفال على فرصة النجاح. ومن خلال ذلك يمكننا تمهيد الطريق لمستقبل أكثر إشراقاً، ومستقبل تتاح فيه الفرصة لكل طفل لتحقيق إمكانياته الكاملة والمساهمة في مجتمع أكثر ازدهاراً. في ختام كلمتي أرحب بكم مرة أخرى، وأترك الآن المجال للدكتورة حنان عساف، أخصائية الطفولة المبكرة في أكاديمية الملكة رانيا لتدريب المعلمين، والتي تعتمد خبراتها الواسعة كمعلمة رياض أطفال سابقة لدعم المعلمين في تعزيز نمو الأطفال وتطورهم، حاصلة على درجة الماجستير في تعليم رياض الأطفال، ومتابعة لدرجة الدكتوراه في المناهج وطرق تدريس الأطفال في رياض الأطفال. وتركز أبحاثها على فاعلية النهج القائم على العلوم والتكنولوجيا والهندسة والرياضيات في تنمية قدرات التفكير المستقبلي لدى الأطفال. بالإضافة لذلك فهي مدربة معتمدة وتلعب دورا حاسما في تطوير برامج التطوير المهني، وقامت شراكات مع المؤسسات التعليمية لدعم المعلمين في الأردن والمنطقة العربية كاملة. فلتتفضل الدكتورة حنان، أترك لها المنصة لإدارة هذه الجلسة مع تمنياتي لكم بالاستفادة الكاملة منها.
أشكرك بداية سعادة الأستاذة مهرة وعلى المقدمة الرائعة. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed speakers and distinguished guests, a warm welcome to each one of you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm thrilled to have you join this online session, which is part of the RCEP initiatives known as the 90 Minutes of Knowledge series. Before we start, please note that the instant interpretation is available in Arabic and English. By clicking on the interpretation button represented by the globe icon at the bottom of the Zoom window, you can choose the language you would like to hear. We encourage active participation from our audience. Please feel free to share your insights and questions in the chat box or Q&A section. Your contributions will add depth and diversity to our conversation. Towards the end of the session, our speakers will address the questions you've submitted. My name is Hanan Asaf, an early childhood specialist at Queen Rania Teacher Academy, and I'm honored to moderate this session today with you. Welcome to this online gathering where we will delve into a topic of great importance in the realm of education and research. Before we start our discussions, I want to express my deep gratitude to Her Excellency Al-Ustadha Mahra Al-Mutaw'i, Director of the Regional Center of Educational Planning, RCEP, acknowledged in the field as a visionary education planning expert. Her exceptional leadership and commitment are clear evidence of her impact in education and research. أهلا وسهلا فيكم وفي الجميع. Our meeting today is part of the RCEP's 90 Minutes of Knowledge series, designed to share impactful research and foster connections among professionals. The spotlight is on the research paper titled Exploring the Influence of Preschool Education and Parental Involvement on Early Childhood Achievement in the GCC countries, led by Dr. Maciej Jakubowski and Dr. Tomasz Gajdarowicz, Dr. Susan Kippels, and Dr. Soha Osman Shami. Allow me to introduce you to our esteemed speakers. each contributing a unique wealth of knowledge. Dr. Maciej Jakubowski, a PhD economist and sociology MA, currently an assistant professor at the University of Warsaw. He founded the Evidence Institute in 2014 to advocate for evidence-based policymaking and student assessments. With a background in OECD PISA and as a former deputy minister in the Polish Ministry of National Education, Dr. Maciej consults for global organizations and governments on education and labor market policies. Dr. Tomasz Gajderowicz, a PhD holder in economic sciences, is a seasoned policy advisor specializing in education and labor market dynamics. As a research director at the Evidence Institute and an assistant professor at the University of Warsaw, he employs modern microeconometric techniques for analyzing preferences and assessments in international projects. And Dr. Tomasz serves as an expert for the World Bank and ETC, contributing to research and publications on the transition from education to the labor market. Now, without further delay, I invite our esteemed speakers to begin with their presentation. The presentation will last for 20 minutes and will focus on summarizing the paper, highlighting key findings, and presenting recommendations. Afterward, we will return to explore the valuable inputs from our distinguished guests. Dr. Maciej and Dr. Tomasz, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hanan, for this introduction. We will now demonstrate an overview of what we developed during our research with RCEP. And let me just use this opportunity to really appreciate and thank the institution and the entire team for just investing so much effort into digesting into what really matters for the education. How can we overcome problems in education, identify them, and really make them and really find solutions in policy to what can be done. That's really a huge topic, and this is what we are mainly doing. As Dr. Hanan mentioned, we also work in Evidence Institute Foundation, as this name, we search for evidence to really improve education. We believe that's one of the most important things in our lives, and also something essential for not only education, but also, as Her Excellency said, for economic development and for the wealth of nations. So let me get back to the results we have found in our studies with RCEP, where we developed several areas of educational excellence and how to improve educational systems. So today we will focus mainly on preschool education and early engagement that might improve the entire pathway for development of students in the educational system. In general, I will start with the overview of data sources and main challenges, while Maciej, in the second part of this short presentation, will get into details and show concrete data to support our recommendations. Most of the analysis we used in our report rely on the international large-scale assessments. And of course, the most well-known are PISA, PIRLS, and TIMSS. While PISA is for 15-year-olds, so the effect of preschool education and early parental involvement is already goes along with several other factors. But for PIRLS and TIMSS, these are two assessments that are administered for the fourth graders and sometimes third graders, but we focus on the fourth graders. So the impact of what happened just before the school and the impact of the parental involvement is really huge. We are also worth mentioning in very exciting moment in education. Just in around 2 weeks, we will have the PISA 2022 data release. So we will see what happens in education, what happened after experiencing COVID pandemic and so on. I will also refer to that in a minute. But today what we will share will be mainly based on TIMSS, which is Trends in International Mathematics Science Study, and the most latest assessment was conducted in 2019, and the PEARLS, which it was conducted in 2021, but we will show mainly the data from 2016 for a certain reason. One is that the report was published before data release, but then we will show also some more up-to-date results. But also in the in the PEARLS 2021, there are some difficulties related to the methodology, because this assessment was disrupted with COVID-related school closure. In general, if we will look at the PEARLS 2016 data, we see that achievement of GCC countries are in general lower than in non-GCC countries. This is the reading comprehension assessment, with results for United Arab Emirates being and Bahrain being the best in terms of ranking of the kids in fourth grade achievement. You may say, okay, but please let's look at 2021 data. Yes, these are the results. But the disruption resulted from COVID made many countries forced to delay the assessment of fourth grade cohort to the beginning of the fifth year. So in this table, we see the results of GCC countries with other countries, but we need to have in mind that these results were not exactly comparable with other countries, due to the fact that the assessment was actually lagged for almost 1 year. So the students were older, but experiencing different intensity of COVID disruption. So for this reason, for some like system level analysis, it's sometimes better to focus on PEARLS 2016 and TIMSS 2021. What comes out from this assessment in 2016 is also the interquartile range of fourth grade students in reading. This is the measure of how different are scores from the top and low performing students. And as you can see, in GCC countries in general, this interquartile range is lower than in non-GCC countries, but there are a few countries like Qatar and United Emirates especially, where this variation in results is huge. So for United Arab Emirates, we may say they perform the best, but students vary strongly in terms of their achievement. That's also very important. We know in education that we want to progress as fast as possible, but not leaving anyone behind. If we look at the mathematics achievement in fourth grade we will see that also the structure is very similar. And also here, the interquartile range of fourth grade students is way lower. So I would say that in mathematics, the diversity, the variation in the results is way lower than in reading comprehension. This is also kind of a call for action when you think of how to improve education and where is the real challenge for educational system. These results show us overview of where we are in international comparisons in terms of basic achievements. Now, what are the challenges and what is the role of preschool education and parental involvement? Well, to understand that, we need to look closely into non-cognitive scales and how they affect what happens in education. So we know from those assessments that students who enjoy reading, enjoy mathematics, enjoy the activities, they perform way better than other students, especially in GCC countries, in Kuwait, in Saudi Arabia, in Oman. The differences between those who enjoy learning learning are huge. They are almost around half of standard deviation, yes, in assessment. That's a lot. And we know from the cognitive science that enjoyment of learning is strongly related to what we achieve and at the beginning of our educational journey. So if students at the beginning of the school are already engaged and are aware of some like basic reading, basic mathematics, they will be more likely enjoying what they are doing, and this directly corresponds to how they achieve in international assessments. We also know how different are results of students from low socioeconomic background and high socioeconomic background, and these changes might be, if we think of socioeconomic background of students, this is very hard to be approached by educational policy. And actually, the preschool enrollment is one of those things that at very early age can contribute to helping students from disadvantaged background to achieve better, because they are somehow covered with all the educational activities. That's a huge challenge and a chance for especially disadvantaged students in educational system. For GCC countries, we also know that if you look at the human capital index and the logarithm of GDP, in general, they are underperforming in terms of human capital in compared to where they should be looking at their economic development. This shows a huge place for improvement in quality of education and reforms that might contribute to improving the human capital to be exactly as it should correspond to the wealth and economic situation of the nation. And finally, one of the biggest challenges that we see now in educational system is a COVID-related educational loss. It's very hard to measure. We are a bit proud of publishing lately in Economic Letters a paper with Maciej Jakubowski and Harry Patrinos where we estimated, based on entire pool of countries, the world database and all the rounds of PEARLS assessment, we estimated how education departs from the long-term trends for each country, showing what is the COVID-related educational gap that should be addressed through policies that will target especially those in the highest needs. And from the results, we see that the departure from the trend is huge. It's around, let's say, 1 year of learning for students. We also found significant correlation with the weeks of full or partial school closures worldwide. That shows how COVID was disruptive and destructive for education quality worldwide. That's a huge call for action for all policymakers. And we also show that these lags, this gap, cannot be simply overcome by like ruling regular business. No, education is really not able, students are not able to fill these gaps in regular education. We need to have targeted interventions that would help students perform better. Especially that the biggest losses were among those students that already had difficulties in learning. Actually, the school closure for the top performing students was not that disruptive. What was the biggest problem is that students with already difficulties, who already were not performing well, they lost the most. And here, additional non-parental involvement and care on the preschool and early grades is especially important for helping education to recover. You may say that in UAE and in other GCC countries, in many countries actually achievement improved. But if there was no COVID school closure, this achievement will be even better. So we should think about it also as the issue that should be addressed. Now, looking at how those early preschool and childhood activities can support education, and how are they related to educational achievement at later stages. This was deeply discovered in our report on preschool education and early achievement in primary schools in GCC countries. And Maciej now take floor to discover some of the econometric analysis and statistics around what works for early education and preschool activities, and how can we improve education and also really address those challenges, especially in this most difficult times over educational history, so recovering after COVID. Maciej, the floor is yours.
Okay, stop sharing, Tomasz. Thank you. And so I can share my screen. Thank you. So yes, so the summary of all the findings based on the data from PERS and teams can be found in the report. Written together with colleagues from RCEP, and we also have a policy brief which is available on the website summarizing the main findings. So let's go through that now. So first start with preschool participation. I mean, depending on the source, you get a little bit different picture of how popular is preschool in GCC countries. So these are the data. These are the data from UNESCO on how many kids were enrolled just before starting primary school, and you can see here that at least United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Oman, the data show the percentage is pretty high, and it's very close to OECD countries. If you look at Kuwait, Bahrain, and especially Saudi Arabia, this percentage is lower. Still, I mean, if you look, if you compare that with the data from Teams assessment, which is a unique source because it actually gives you the data from parents of these children, and they tell you on a representative sample how long were kids in preschool. That gives you a little bit different picture. I mean, it's still consistent with what we showed previously, but it shows that in many countries, in GCC countries, fewer students attend preschool for 3 years or more, so for full period of preschool education, normally, let's say, across countries, right? Internationally, on average, it's 56%. So you can compare to that, but in many countries, for example, in European Union, most children in countries like France, for example, they attend preschool from the age of 3. And what is more worrying is that there is a substantial number of children who do not attend preschool at all. So they go straight to primary school, or many children who attend preschool, but very briefly, for 1 year or even less. So actually, these data are consistent with the previous picture. For example, in Saudi Arabia, you have 70% of children, according to their parents, were not in preschool or went for 1 year or less, which shows a problem in Saudi Arabia with preschool participation, with around half or even more students going to primary school without any or very brief preschool education. So if you look at socioeconomic background, we already said that this is highly correlated with preschool participation internationally, but in GCC countries even more, because the rates are lower. What we see from the data very clearly is that preschool is for children from affluent families, from those who are educated, who have a higher occupational status or more at home. And of course, if you look at research results, those students who have the lowest socioeconomic background in all these countries, those are in need of preschool education, really. I mean, those are students who cannot learn that much at home from their parents academically, because their parents are not educated, and it's very important for them to start education as early as possible. So summing it up, so we see in GCC countries children attend preschool, I mean, fewer children attend preschool education. And if they do, they actually attend it for shorter periods of time, with very relatively few children attending preschool education for 3 years. And we also see that it's highly correlated with socioeconomic background. So the children who go to preschool education are from more affluent families, and vice versa. Those who do not benefit from preschool education are those from disadvantaged families. So let's look now at achievement in primary school as a measure of effectiveness of preschool education. So in general, it's very difficult to measure effectiveness of preschool participation or education. As mentioned by Ms. Mahra in the beginning, there are some experimental studies, but mostly from United States or other countries, showing some benefits of preschool education. I think, I would need 2 hours to go deeper into this literature, but if I want to summarize it into sentences, first, the quality matters. So it's not just participation, but it's really the curriculum, the quality of teachers, what they are doing with children, that matters for the outcomes. So not every preschool will benefit children equally, and quality at this age is very important. And also what you do with that in primary school. So in many countries, you have some instruction, preschool participation, but because some children do not go to preschool education, then when they enter primary school, many things start from the beginning, right? So instruction, teachers have to repeat everything. So of course, children who already learn something, they relatively slow down. In preschool settings, we also know that outcomes are very difficult to measure. We actually do not have any international study comparing actual skills of children in preschool settings. The only study available was started by OECD, but only few countries participated. So we don't really have this data. We don't have methodology. That's why in this report, we look at the results of 4th grade students. So we took pairs data for reading, we took teams for mathematics and science to see at the age of 10, what are the differences between children attending preschool, and also, which is an important finding of our report, what are the differences between children doing different things with their parents at home before starting school. So let's start with these activities at home, and you can see that a positive finding is that in none of the countries there are parents who never or almost never were involved in any educational activities with their children. So all parents play with children, they sing songs, or they draw, they try to recognize letters and so on. However, those who report that they were doing that very often before primary school, I mean, they are less numerous than internationally, except United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. But in other GCC countries, there are fewer parents reporting doing that very often. And if you look at the results, so the difference in mathematics in results in primary school, there is a difference in achievement in all countries. Children whose parents reported not playing very often with them before starting school achieve lower. Of course, that can be related to differences in socioeconomic background, which we will address in a second. An interesting finding from these studies is also that when you ask parents what they can do before starting primary school, and then you have a list of things children can do, like recognize a letter, recognize a number, add small numbers, things like that. Parents in GCC countries tend to be more optimistic that their children do very well comparing to international average. They actually can recognize achievement of children. So those who say they were doing
Dr.
very well.
Maciej,
Yes?
just a friendly reminder that you have 1 minute remaining for your presentation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do much better than those who were not doing this. So parents can recognize achievement. However, in these countries, they are much more optimistic. And here we go to crucial results on preschool participation and results of students. So these are the results for mathematics. You see the differences in some countries, but mostly East that students who didn't attend preschool at all, they have the lowest results. If you look at reading, is the same, that students who didn't attend preschool have the lowest results in most countries. But for others, like here in Kuwait, there is no difference really whether they attended 3 years or less. That's quite interesting. And again, we have to control for socioeconomic background, as that is related to preschool participation. That's why we run several regressions, and here we can focus on the third column, looking at reading achievement relationship between achievement and preschool participation in non-GCC countries and GCC countries. You see, it's positive, but it's not very large. If you control for parents, whether they like reading, for example, there's a very similar effect. And then if you control for early literacy and numeracy activities, you see that in GCC countries, again, the coefficient is almost the same. So it's all controlling for socioeconomic background, gender and country fixed effects and other things. So summing it up, it means that in GCC countries, this preschool participation effect is positive, but it tends to be similar in size to involvement of parents. So parental involvement in early education is as important as preschool. So you have also in the report results for individual countries, but I don't have time really to go through that. Let's just summarize the main, the recommendations which we give in the report. So first is to expand access to early education in GCC countries, ensuring that all programs have proper curriculum, proper teacher training, are of high quality, and we give examples of some countries which made a lot of effort in this area. Also, it's very important to encourage and support parents with more disadvantaged background to enroll to preschool education. Preschool is really important for children from these families when no one is maybe reading at home, parents are not really playing educational games, they are not well educated. For them, preschool is the only chance to start strong in primary school. And you can do it in formal preschool settings, but we also list a lot of examples of how you can support parents at home, how you can organize, more flexible preschool education, even at home or other places, not necessarily going into full-scale preschool facilities all over the country. Thank you very much. That's everything. And I'm sorry for taking 1 or 2 minutes longer. Thank you.
Thank you, our esteemed speakers, Dr. Matre and Dr. Tomasz, for the insightful presentation summarizing the paper's key findings and the recommendations. Actually, there was a clear focus on the critical role parents play in a child's educational development, and this is very important. And I would like to go further into this aspect by asking 2 questions, if you allow me. So the first one, how can policies and programs be designed to support parents and positively engaging with and supporting their children? You mentioned that children of parents who engage in educational games demonstrate higher level of achievements. So could you please elaborate on other impactful strategies in this regard?
Yes, thank you. So this was in our recommendations, and we list several programs. First of all, I think it's very important to encourage parents to do that and to empower them to do that at home, because many parents don't know how to do this. I mean, they of course know very simple games, but it starts to be boring if you repeat the same game every day. So they need a vocabulary of different games activities with children, and that's very straightforward to do. To provide, but it's less straightforward to encourage parents to do it at home. In some countries, teachers are trained and educated on how to involve parents. So and opportunities are created that even if kids are not enrolled in preschool, parents can meet with teachers or educators and learn from them. You can have national campaigns on that. You can have, you know, programs in TV or materials distributed to all parents. A nice example is a Finnish one. When the child is born, they give you a basket including books and ideas for educational activities already, right, at the age of 0. So these are examples of how you can do that on a larger scale in every country.
The communication actually between the parents and educators is very important at this stage. You also mentioned that reading achievement in GCC countries is falling below the international average. And this raises important questions about early literacy activities at home. So how do these activities conducted before a child starts primary school education impact their achievement by the 4th grade? Can you identify specific types of early numeracy, for example, and literacy activities at home that are most linked with higher achievement in mathematics and sciences during the 4th grade, for example?
Yeah, it's very difficult to tie, you know, what you do before starting school with a later achievement to a particular activity. I mean, from this data, we have a broad picture that these activities are important. I mean, all of them, actually, all of them. So playing any game, any educational game, you know, recognize, but then we know from research what is important. I mean, recognizing letters. And for reading, for example, recognizing letters and making an effort, for example, through songs, that you connect, you know, written letters with sounds. So phonics, basically. You can teach parents to do that
as well. Storybooks are very important. Yeah.
And that gives you a huge chance that your child will go very, you know, fast in primary school. And the problem here with preschool education is that with many children not attending any education and going to school, what teachers can do in the 1st or 2nd grade, right? I mean, they have to step down and they have to work with the weakest students. So they can go faster with reading, for example, right? That's why preschool education, I think it's a prerequisite for teachers to teach effectively in primary school and to achieve well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Your insights are greatly valued, and I appreciate the opportunity to explore these aspects further. Now let's move to our first guest, Dr. Yoshi Kaga. In her 7-minute presentation, she will share similar findings and conclusions from other studies that focus on the importance of early childhood care and education for learning achievement, as well as the significance of parental involvement in early childhood education. Dr. Yoshi Kaga is the leader of the Learning to Live Together LTLT team at UNESCO Regional Bureau for West Africa, focusing on education for peace, sustainable development, and early childhood care and education, ECCE, in emergency situations. With a background as an ECCE specialist at UNESCO headquarters since 1998, she has been involved in international and regional ECCE initiatives and authored publications addressing global ECC issues. Kaga holds a master's in social anthropology from the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London, and a PhD in education from UCL Institute of Education, London. Dr. Yoshi Kaga, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hanan, for giving me the floor, and thank you so much for giving me this precious opportunity to participate in this webinar. I need to apologize because I have to leave in about 5 to 8 minutes because of my prior commitment. I would also like to congratulate the authors on this excellent study. So I would like to ask Ms. Noof to project my presentation, if possible. So while the presentation is being displayed, I would like to sort of mention a few insights that I have taken away from the study. So first of all, it shows the importance, of course, of early childhood education for later achievement in reading, math, and science, as well as the importance of parental involvement in early education. And it offers insights about variation that exists between and within the GCC countries, as well as in relation to other countries in the assessments. What is worrying, which is shown in the result, is that there is socioeconomic inequities in the results, which is that children from lower resourced families who are less educated oftentimes have less access to preschool education, and education benefits associated with preschool attendance is weaker among children from less resourced families compared to those from better resourced families. You can flip the slides, please. Yeah, next, please. Thank you. So what I would like to do is to offer some additional suggestions around these headlines recommendations put forward by the authors, which is to say increasing participation in preschool education, especially for disadvantaged children. Ensure high quality preschool education, which includes issues about curriculum, workforce, monitoring, and evaluation supported by greater funding. Encourage parental involvement and support in early learning. So the suggestions that I will present often have reference to the Tashkent Declaration, which is the text on collective commitment that has been adopted by participants at the World Conference on Early Childhood Education, organized by UNESCO and Uzbekistan in 2022. For information, this conference gathered about 2,600 participants from 155 countries, and the declaration text went through an elaborate process of discussion and review among stakeholders as prescribed in the rules regarding UNESCO Category 2 meeting. Next, please. So let me refer to some suggestions regarding the first headline recommendations. So I like to highlight 3 dimensions. First, it may be worthwhile looking at the extent of private provision in the countries. Often private provision can be afforded by better resourced families and placing less resourced families at a disadvantage in terms of access. So looking at the GCC countries, according to UIS data, the private enrollment in pre-primary education varies. With Bahrain with 100%. Next to it is Oman, 89.8%, while Kuwait has lower rates, as well as Saudi Arabia with 19.7%. We didn't find UAE data in the database. So a suggestion could be made to expand public provision, which is accessible and affordable for disadvantaged children, and also provision could also be promoted to prioritize the intake of disadvantaged children. The second bit is about legislating and implementing free and compulsory pre-primary education. And as you might know, the SDG 4 Education 2030 framework, as well as the Tashkent Declaration, call for countries to ensure at least 1 year of free and compulsory pre-primary education. Looking at the UIS data, we only find UAE providing 2 years of free pre-primary education among the GCC countries. For information around the world, there are in total 63 countries providing free pre-primary education, and 51 countries providing compulsory pre-primary education according to UNESCO study in 2021. So another suggestion could be about the increasing investment, of course, in pre-primary. So the Tashkent Declaration encourages countries to work towards the target of allocating at least 10% of total education budget to preschool education. For the OECD countries, there is a financial target of 1% of GDP for ECEC, while the OECD average is 0.8%. So it would be interesting to know how GCC countries would fare in these regards. Next, please. So the ensuring high quality preschool education has been mentioned by the presenters very pertinently, and it does reflect the suggestions and guiding principles that are put forward in Tashkent Declaration. One of the indicators, if we could look at, it's about the qualification requirement to work in ECCE among GCC countries. For public services, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and UAE require educators to have completed bachelor degree in early childhood education, whereas Bahrain, Oman, and Qatar require primary education or home economics background. And then if you look at the private services, the qualification requirement is not too much about having a ECE background specific. Sorry.
موجودة أصلاً إحنا بعض موجودة. زين
another indication that's included in the Tashkent Declaration. I'm sorry, I hear somebody speaking in the background. Another indication which is mentioned in the Tashkent Declaration is about providing the same wages and working conditions for pre-primary education teachers and primary education teachers. So it will be interesting to see what is the situation in the GCC countries. Next, please. So the third headline recommendation is about, of course, about the parental involvement, and just to say perhaps that sorry, next slide, please. Yes, thank you. So it's just to say that there are existing good practice that can be inspiring for all the countries in the region, including the GCC countries. I've just put sort of concrete examples from Bahrain, MOSEP, Positive Parenting Project in Tunisia, and HIP project, which has been implemented in Lebanon, Egypt, and Jordan. So another point I wanted to make in this regard was that, of course, this caring education for young children is not only the business of Ministry of Education, but also for other ministries who can work in coherence and in coordination with one in another. Another element that I wanted to bring in was about parental leave that could be useful very much for parents to be able to spend time with their new child, to be engaged in educational and warm relationships. Next, please.
Dr. Yoshi, a friendly reminder that you have 1 minute remaining for your presentation. Thank you
very much. So this is my final slide. So I just wanted to leave this intervention with two final points. So in view of the fact that there is a clear disadvantage for lower resourced families in terms of preschool access and having access to quality preschool education. So it would be good to consider early education as a common good, as we have been calling for education in all the levels of education. The second point I wanted to make was about the relevance of 4 pillars of learning, which does encompass sort of an integrated view of learning, which is not only about reading, writing, math, and science, but there are many purposes and multidimensional factors that make up the value and the purpose of education. So I just wanted to emphasize that when we talk about early childhood education, we should be sort of reminding ourselves about what is measurable, but also, and more importantly, maybe what is not, or what cannot be measured very easily. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Yoshi Kaga, for your insightful presentation. Thank you so much. we noticed that the emphasis you place on ensuring high quality preschool education with a significant focus on the professional development of teachers. This emphasis is especially crucial at this foundational stage, actually, and your insights underscore the importance of investing in the continuous growth and expertise of educators. We all know that through professional development, teachers equipped with the latest research, teaching techniques, and a deeper understanding of child development. And this, in turn, leads them to contribute to the creation of a more enriched educational environment. Thank you so much for this presentation. Now we will move on to our second guest, Dr. Matthias Urban. He's the Desmond Chair of Early Childhood Education and Director of the Early Childhood Research Centre at Dublin City University, Ireland. He's also a professor of pedagogy at the University of Stavanger, Norway, focusing on integrating early childhood systems, diversity, equality, social justice, and various socio-cultural contexts. Recognized for his contributions, he received the Marianne Block Distinguished Career Award in 2018 and the DCU President's Research Impact Award in 2020. And he has led G20, T20 Early Childhood Development Policy briefs for multiple countries and is a member of the European Commission Expert Working Group on Early Childhood Education and Care. Ladies and gentlemen, we now welcome our second guest, Dr. Matthias Urban. In his 7 minutes presentation, he will be discussing essential changes needed for the rise in children's achievement. The stage is now yours, Dr. Matthias Urban.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to speak to this very important event. Just highlighting the importance of early childhood education and the efforts being undertaken by countries in the region to actually move forward in a very important agenda. Thank you for the presentation about the impact of early childhood education in terms of future achievement of young children. What I'm suggesting to add to the conversation resonates quite a lot with Dr. Kaga's previous comments. I'm hoping to add some global context in which to through which to assess what we're doing in terms of early childhood policies and practices going forward. First of all, and that was mentioned in the initial presentation, we have come through a time of disruption. 2 years of a global COVID-19 pandemic have shown to many countries that there is a crucial role of early child education as a common good and a public service, which is essential for the functioning of entire societies. And what we've also learned is that despite significant differences of early childhood systems between countries, very similar issues have emerged, and early childhood education has become what Bruno Latour once called a matter of concern in both the global South and North. That, of course, offers opportunities for learning with each other in terms of developing the field, but it also raises very urgent questions about the future directions of policy, practice, and research in the field of early childhood education and care. Some of the still dominant paradigms that seem to dominate our thinking have become questionable, I would like to argue. It's the paradigm of the individual child, its development seen as universal. It's the paradigm that knowledge and the way it's created can be decontextualized from the situations in which it is created and by whom. It's the paradigm of simplistic measurement, and that was touched upon in the previous presentations, that there are quite a number of substantial issues that are not simple to measure. And of course, something that we've been dealing with for many years, in the academy, but also in terms of governance, policies and practices that's seen as tools for solving distinct social problems by distinct professions and distinct academic disciplines. This has led, and I'm just showing two quotes here from two fairly recent reports, one published by the World Bank, the first quote, and the second by the OECD. This has laid bare, as the World Bank report states, deep inadequacies in the current system of childcare provision, uneven access, poor quality, need for public finance, and so on. But also, and this is, I think, quite important for the situation we're in, the OECD stating that dysfunctional and unjust economic, social, and political systems are very much embedded in a much wider crisis scenario, response to the damage humankind is inflicting on the world's natural systems and thus inevitably upon itself. So I suppose looking forward, the question is really how to connect early childhood education and care in a frame of thinking that says social and ecological justice can no longer be separated. Early childhood education and care has a crucial role to play when it comes to questions of overcoming inequality in society, when it comes to questions of breaking cycles of intergenerational disadvantage and poverty. But increasingly, it is recognized, and this is a quote from the Council of the European Union, that it is not a solution that can stand on its own. It's not a panacea. Early child education and care, in order to be effective, needs to be part of an integrated child's right-based package of policy measures. And that requires moving outside of the classroom, of the preschool classroom, and moving into the policy and governance environment. We've published a study some years ago now for the European Commission that talks about what we call a competence system and how to achieve it, which is about sharing knowledges, practices, and values across and between all elements and actors of an early childhood system. And that includes policymakers, that includes academics, universities, teacher training, and that includes local decision-making. I would argue that looking at the situation the world finds itself in towards the end of the first quarter of the 21st century already, that we need to focus on developing systemic competences for survival, which are multisectoral. That was mentioned by Dr. Kaga, move outside of the single focus of the Department of Education, that are multidimensional, that cross the levels of all elements of an early childhood systems, that are clearly based on children's rights, as in learning and developing to care for yourself, on human rights, as in caring for others, for the community, but also on more than human rights, caring for the earth, for the cosmos, and clearly competences that are based on values. And as a suggestion, I would list democracy, justice, non-violence, and collaboration across difference as a starting point here. Already mentioned the Tashkent Declaration. I would like to bring the Tashkent Declaration together with two other global documents that I think should inform our debate and discussion moving forward. The first one might look familiar to you. It's the Global Sustainable Development Goals, which is a framework that extends beyond SDG 4 that talks about education, and SDG 4.2 that talks about preschool education. The argument is, and it's becoming increasingly clear, that early childhood education and care is central to achieving the entire SDG framework. The second document that I would like to bring to your attention is the Abidjan Principles, which is a document bringing together expertise from many countries, focusing or urging states to prioritize public over private education and clearly focus on regulating private education where it exists, including early childhood. And then, of course, the Tashkent Declaration, which speaks about early child education as a right from birth, that speaks about whole of government and multi-sectoral policies, and that, as already mentioned, urges countries and encourages countries to spend 10% at least of their overall education budget on early childhood education. Realizing this, the question of early childhood education and care from birth, I would argue, is more than a technical question. It is an ethical and political project that requires a shift in culture and commitment to early childhood education from birth as a global common good. And it also requires wider engagement with communities, wide range of stakeholders, including local leaders, teachers, and all those working in early child education, informal and informal roles. Two urgent tasks ahead to conclude. I think as an early childhood community, we have to define the meaning of universal. What does that actually mean in the context of individual children's and collective community rights? It must mean, universal must mean for all children from birth. And while guaranteed and framed at a national level, it plays out, as we all know, very differently at local level. And that requires, of course, solid fundamental resourcing, financing, and it does not mean treating all children the same. Within a universal system, special resources will have to be allocated to the most disadvantaged to ensure their rights are realized, and we refer to this quite often as progressive universalism. And second, we must redefine what we mean by education. If we recognize children's right to education from birth, and that extends, it goes beyond SDG 4.2. We have to talk about more than pre-primary. Then we have to have a serious conversation about what do we mean by education. And we also have to have a serious conversation about shifting our understanding of school readiness towards a conversation of how to support primary schools to be ready for all children in their diversity.
Dr. Matthias,
thank you very much.
Say that the presentation time has ended. Yeah, and you're done. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Matthias. Thank you so much. Your insights are invaluable, and I appreciate. I need to open my camera. Okay. And I appreciate the part of your presentation where you emphasize the need to redefine the meaning and purpose of education, especially for young children. And through your presentation, you mentioned various challenges and potential solutions within the landscape of early childhood education. And I would like to hear from your expertise on how we can start building a strong early childhood education system, especially considering the challenges we might face in this ever-changing world. So what do you consider important for building a strong foundation for the future of early childhood or early education, making it resilient and ready to tackle any challenges? So do you require, for example, well-defined policies, for example, a commitment to international standards, or enhanced collaboration amongst stakeholders?
Well, what we know is that countries that have more integrated early childhood systems and policies seem to have coped much better with disruption during the pandemic. Most interestingly, many of those countries are not in the global north, but we can find them in the so-called global south. Many of them in Latin America, for instance, but there are many other examples around the world. So integration of systems, policies seems to be a key factor in terms of resilient early childhood systems. We can achieve this, and we can see this in successful examples by very high-level political leadership, integration not just as an ambition, but as something that is taken seriously, for instance, by the head of state, by interdepartmental organization working groups that are responsible for integrating the tasks of different ministries and government agencies. We also see that it is crucially important to move from ambitious policies or frameworks towards binding legislation, because policy priorities change, and only if the integration of early childhood systems is framed in binding national legislation can we have a situation where it can't be easily undone. The second sort of point that we see is that whatever happens at national level needs replication at the territorial, state, and or local level. Again, because we need buy-in from local communities, local leaders, community leaders, from local teachers, from families. So it is a community project rather than a question of rolling out nationally defined early childhood programs. And third, and I think this is something that is an important element of a wider discussion, it's about resourcing and funding. Yes, of course, there are targets, and they are sometimes met, sometimes they're not. But one of the key critical issues in all this is that we need to have a serious engagement with donors, be they international organizations, including the World Bank, be they philanthropy, be they whoever finances programs in this field, that there is a need, when we talk about early childhood as a global common good, to move from financing programs towards enabling states to develop public policy that secure early child education as a right for all children from birth.
Great ideas. Thank you so much, Doctor. And now let's turn to Dr. Emma Pearson, who will share her input and valuable insights in her 7-minute presentation. Dr. Pearson is a researcher specializing in early childhood education and has worked at various universities worldwide. She has extensive experience in conducting policy-oriented research and consultancies, collaborating with international organizations on projects related to early learning and development standards in multiple countries. She also led the drafting stages of the Pacific Guidelines for the development of national quality frameworks for early childhood care and education, ECCE. Dr. Pearson will share with us some important notes, takeaways from the GCC report, and some recommendations. Dr. Pearson, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hanan. I wish we could spend the remainder of the afternoon speaking about some of the issues that Professor Urban has raised around the meaning of education and school readiness and building those strong systems. But yeah, I will make my contribution. Should I share my screen, or is enough?
Yes, you can, please. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay. So are you able to see the presenter view okay?
Yes, yeah, it's clear.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Hanan. So My job is to highlight some of the key findings from the GCC report and also add some insights. I thought I'd add some contextual insights from the United Arab Emirates, which is where I'm working at the moment. I'm going to highlight a couple of key findings that I made note of, and it's interesting to see that other speakers also made note of similar findings. And then I'm going to talk about one or two of the recommendations made in the report and add some comments and suggestions. And also then finally, I'm going to just provide a couple of contextual insights or pieces of information on the situation of early childhood education in the UAE. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the authors on the report. I think many of us in early childhood are slightly cautious about the use of international testing. And as the authors themselves say in the report, it's important to kind of be cautious about the way that we use and interpret information based on international tests. But I think a really important contribution of this report is that it provides a valuable example of how we can use the data within countries to explore patterns, for example, between parental involvement and later learning benefits. And so we can move beyond using those tests just for kind of international cross-country comparisons. So I think that's a really valuable contribution of the report, and I'd like to congratulate the authors. I also, working in the region, I appreciate how difficult it is to find data, and that's one of the important recommendations made in the report. So the takeaways that really stood out for me this has been highlighted previously, was the high numbers of parents across our region who are reporting early caregiver involvement in literacy and numeracy before children reach school. So that's a really positive kind of takeaway that we should highlight, and it indicates that it's really worth pursuing support mechanisms for parents in terms of that early involvement. I think it's important to note that the parents who responded to the early environment questionnaire are likely, by the very nature of their responses, to be more involved. So there's some kind of respondent bias there, but it's a very positive finding that I think needs to be highlighted widely across the region, because it's something that I wasn't aware of. And then again, the finding that has been highlighted by other speakers, and it's a really concerning issue in early childhood education globally, given that one of our key arguments for investing in early childhood education is that it is an equalizer and benefits most children from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. We're seeing a global pattern of growing inequity because early childhood education is becoming oriented towards children from higher socioeconomic backgrounds. And what the findings highlighted in this report kind of suggest is that not only are those children more likely to attend preschool, but they're more likely to attend high quality preschool, and so benefit more. And this is a real issue in terms of risks to equity. So it's something that, again, needs to be highlighted very strongly. The other important point that the authors make is that we need to be a little bit cautious about how we use international testing data, not only in terms of statistical analysis, but also in terms of what they tell us about the broad scope of education. Like Professor Urban was just saying, what is the purpose of education? How do we build an early childhood education system that addresses future challenges? In the UAE, we're very focused on climate change because we have COP28 coming up next month. There are other issues around current global events, peace and conflict. And again, as Professor Urban just mentioned, we need to see early childhood education as being at the heart of some of the solutions to some of those global challenges. And the kind of data that's presented by international testing can't really help us to answer those broader questions. It can help us to understand patterns in academic performance, but the broader questions are something that we have to kind of address at another level. Also, that question of what policies and initiatives are in place to ensure equitable access. So the very difficult key questions that we're grappling with that are presented in the RSEP brief are more complicated to kind of answer. And then there are some important recommendations made in the report that I thought were worth highlighting. All the recommendations, of course, are important, but the authors recommend or point to the importance of hiring and training well-qualified teachers. Of course, we know that we can have access to the best resources, state-of-the-art building facilities, really well-developed curricula, but at the heart of delivery of early childhood education is teachers, early childhood teachers. And I thought it's worth adding to hiring and training the issue of attracting and supporting. We have a real issue of attracting the right people into early childhood education. So we really need to advocate for early childhood education. We need to have high expectations of ourselves. We need to see ourselves as a really core part of society and the broader education system. I've been visiting practicum students in schools here recently, and I've really noticed that Professor Urban was also saying governments need to be strongly committed to and have high expectations of early childhood education. We see this at the school level. My students are most motivated when they are working in schools that place high expectations on themselves, not in terms of children's academic performance, but in terms of supporting well-being, working with families, seeing early childhood as the absolute core foundation of well-being in education and broader society. The other thing that we need to do in this region, I think, is we're very influenced by what happens in the rest of the world. In the UAE, we're strongly influenced by US curricula, UK curricula. And if we are going to keep well-equipped practitioners in the field, we have to give them a way to kind of link to curricula. So we need to localize and give meaning to curriculum. Also, in terms of encouraging parental involvement, we need to train home-based early childhood caregivers. So not just teachers based in formal settings, but also caregivers working in the home, because many homes in this region are very highly dependent on caregivers while parents work. Another recommendation is building mechanisms for monitoring feedback and professional development. So important in this region to start building mechanisms for data, producing data that can help improve and monitor progress. But early childhood education is quite new in this region. And as we develop those systems, we need to learn from some of the mistakes made in other more developed countries where ECE is more developed, by making sure that those monitoring feedback systems prioritize children's well-being and progress, and not so much competition and performativity. We also need to make sure that those systems are informed by concepts of mentorship and inspiring teachers, oriented away from very high level pressure and performativity. And then the final, I thought I would add a recommendation that we really need to make sure, as ECE is expanded in the region, to connect schools and communities. There are some great examples in the UAE of schools in remote areas of the desert where they are the most, new schools have been built, and they are the most important area in the community, because they are used to create access to health, parent support, as well as education. So it's important, as ECE expands, that it doesn't become a mechanism for separating children from their communities. Just a couple of contextual anecdotes. we have seen considerable investment and expansion in the UAE. The number of kindergartens across the Emirates from 2015 to 2019 increased from 120 to 1,662. And they're all of these settings are based in purpose-built buildings. So we've seen a huge investment. The number of qualified early childhood education teachers is growing. So we are seeing a move away from teachers from with any kind of educational degree or background in early childhood to a more specialist degree. And we're seeing expansion into the nursery sector. But across all age groups, as other speakers have indicated, the private sector dominates. So 36% versus public versus 64% private. And if we are going to achieve equity, this balance needs to be kind of more oriented towards public sector provision. And as I indicated earlier, international influence is strong. So we really need to build within this region our own identity for early childhood education.
Dr. Pearson, I'm sorry to say that the presentation time has ended. I'm so sorry. We would love to hear more from you.
No problem.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Pearson, for sharing your invaluable insights. Your expertise has enriched this discussion, actually. So now, ladies and gentlemen, now we will proceed to address the questions that have been shared by you. Our speakers are ready to provide insightful answers. So let's address the first question we received from actually, this question is for Dr. Tomasz. Given the emphasis on early school years and the role of preschool enrollment in providing opportunities for students from disadvantaged backgrounds, how can policymakers ensure equitable access to early childhood education, and how can they encourage higher numbers of enrollment?
Yes,
this is from Ms. Aisha.
Thank you. I will maybe address this question and also some of the other questions that I might comment on. That's not much time, so I will just put it into putting on the table two most significant policies that should be rolled out when we think of increasing the enrollment rate for preschool and also parental engagement. So first of all, what is today the biggest challenge is working on the incentives compatibility for parents to understand how important is that to increase engagement of their children in the preschool activities and in general in early reading and mathematics activities. So usually kids from disadvantaged backgrounds, they have a problem that their parents do not see the benefits. They do not understand how important is that for the development of their kids to engage in all these activities. So working on the framework for incentives, so showing the benefits and also giving very precise analysis of costs and benefits of a certain behavior is one thing that should be rolled out. So focus on incentives. Second thing is that what already Maciej touched a bit is that even though parents are engaged and want to include in their behavior some early literacy or numeracy activities, they don't know how to do it. So for example, we know that doing some activities at home is one thing, but we can do it in a way that students will lose their motivation, or we can use what cognitive science is giving us. So we can use techniques of retrieval practice, space practice, interleaving. These are very simple techniques that can be really used by parents from all socioeconomic backgrounds, and these are simple things like type of the questions we are asking, to ask students not the very general question, how was that in school, and ask questions about letters, numbers, and so on. It's about like a different way of asking questions that will allow students to recall from the long-term memory, and this will in consequence make them more engaged, better educated, and more aware of what's going on. So there are like several very easy to implement instruments that can be used. So first of all, incentives, and second of all, the evidence-based, cognitive science-based way of acting and dealing with kids at home.
Thank you, Dr. Tomasz. Nof, there is a question in Arabic. Should I translate it or read it in Arabic?
You can actually read it in Arabic. It will be translated.
Okay.
But if you want me, I can translate it also and send it to you. But I prefer reading the questions that are in English first, then I'll share with you that one in Arabic.
Okay, I have it in Arabic. So should I read it now in Arabic and translate it later?
Yes.
اوكي السؤال من دكتور بشير محمود من الجزائر: هل هناك تكوين مسبق للمعلمين قبل توظيفهم لمهمة التعليم المبكر؟ وهل يمكن التفكير في اعتماد فروع للتكوين في كليات التربية والمعاهد المتخصصة خاصة للمعلمين المتخصصين في التعليم المبكر؟ So they're asking about is there pre-training for teachers before they are employed for the task of early education, and can we consider establishing specialized branches in education colleges, for example, for teachers that specialize in early education?
Yeah, I think that's exactly how it should be designed. So usually also corresponding to what I just have said about the cognitive science-based techniques, the only way of approaching parents is also through the teachers' education to disseminate this knowledge. So very specialized training should be rolled out, very separate also from the general teachers' education. But especially for kindergartens and for parents' involvement in young kids' education, this needs to be way more specific and simplified in compared to what is perceived as the teachers' training. This needs to be quick wins, targeted interventions that are just simply put on the table and disseminate.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Tomasz. Another question about the involvement of parents. How, from Ms. Roshan Hassan, how to educate parents that their involvement in their child education improves student attendance, social skills, and behavior? So, any of the speakers would like to answer?
I can take it if you want.
Please, thank you.
I would like to re-emphasize what Dr. Tomasz said and what Dr. Matthias said about, that in many countries the system is highly fragmented. So you have teachers who are professionally educated, and very often you require higher level of education or professional experience to teach in higher grades. Then you have people who work in nurseries, for example, not necessarily educated in pedagogical issues or at different levels. And it's a highly fragmented system. And what we need to simplify it, and we need to also put more emphasis on skills of people who are teaching our children. The common misunderstanding is that it is easier to teach in preschool than, for example, at the end of primary school, and that is not true. Maybe the content is more difficult to grasp, but it's still not very advanced. but training of teachers and other professionals working with children should be focused on pedagogy, and pedagogy should be based on evidence, on research, and it's not the case. I mean, we believe in many myths in education. Teachers also believe in these myths because they were not educated properly, and that needs to change. We need to more rely on research and evidence and what we know about learning, and that also relates to relationships and social skills of people working, for example, with parents. I mean, at least I have experience in my country, but in many countries, the problem is that teachers, they know how to deal with children, and they really don't know how to deal with adults. So teachers are professional in educating, raising children, but when they speak to parents, when they communicate with them, they treat them very often as children, and that's highly problematic. At least in our country, that's really problematic, and this miscommunication results in parents not being really involved in preschool or school education. And it goes further. I mean, if you have people who have these social relationships with families, they have to be also properly trained in how to keep this communication alive, how to involve parents in the education. And then, after we agree what education is, I agree. It's like Dr. Emma said, it's a difficult and issue requiring additional 2 hours at least, or 2 days to discuss. But then these people should be trained how to provide these effectively. So again, based on evidence and research, and pass it to parents. As Thomas said, there are easy methods to apply with small children, but many teachers and many parents indirectly are not aware of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. And unfortunately, due to time limitations, we will need to conclude the session. And if any speakers have some brief final remarks, we welcome them now. So I just want actually to thank you once again to everyone who contributed to this insightful discussion, and we hope let's continue working together to shape a brighter future for young learners. I appreciate your insights and collaboration. Thank you so much, and please, if any of the speakers have anything to say before we end the session, go ahead, please.
Just one comment on the final discussion, because sometimes with those like high stake discussions, you may have a feeling that these are like high level principles that are not related to what's happened really on the ground. But it is. In this case, if we think about the cognitive science based methods, if we think about incentive design, if we think about what tools to give parents, this is something that is ready, can be implemented immediately, and the power of those kind of interventions is really huge. So that's really paradoxically very, very practical session that policymakers can really roll out from it several very concrete interventions. So that's the only comment I have at the end. And thank you. That was really an honor, pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Tomasz. Anyone else?
Just a brief comment. Like I said, I mean, we should rely more on evidence, on research in supporting teachers and all those who are raising our children, educating them. But even more, I think we have to re-emphasize what Dr. Matthias said, and also Dr. Emma and other speakers, how important is preschool education. It's really a prerequisite, especially for kids with disadvantaged background, to progress in school, to start strong in school. So we, in many countries, we treat it as not really as education, and that has to change. Thank you.
Dr. Emma, do you have anything to add?
No, again, just To congratulate the authors on the study. I think it's so important that we, within this region, we strengthen our data sources, but also that we use them to inform policy that is kind of regional and local specific, which I think this report can really contribute to, as Dr. Thomas was just saying. It can its contribution is important in terms of potential for informing policy. But those broader questions around what is the purpose of education, how we can strengthen systems, they're questions that we will continue to grapple with, I think.
Thank you. Dr. Matthias?
Yes, I just want to echo that. Thank you very much for the insights in this report. And I really would like to commend your work in the region to actually put such an emphasis, such a focus on early childhood education as a common good. So this is extremely important. Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this.
Thank you. Thank you once again to everyone. And thank you, our esteemed speakers and guests and our audience. And have a lovely day ahead. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Shukran. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very much.